Cheers, guys. Epix 911. Welcome to the 7th in the VR podcast series. Think I'm close to finding a name, and it's probably going to be VR Raw. I should have written your name down, but you'll know who you are. Thanks for that suggestion. Speaks to the wrestling geek in me, and I think it represents the show itself. It is quite a bit more raw and unedited, so I'm going to go with that probably, so expect the branding changes within the next few episodes. Last podcast we had was back on Thursday. Of course, we had VR Roundup on the Friday, on the Gaming Friday, and then I joined the guys over at VR Roundtable yesterday, which, guys, was an absolute frickin' blast. So Gary, Steve, Chris, Anthony, if you guys are watching this, thank you so much. Had a blast and would absolutely love to do it again if a slot opens up in the future. You kind of forget, you're doing this solo for so long, like in my case, what it's like to have people who share your hobby, your passion, your enthusiasm for something, right? Sure, I have Exity, but that's always been a lot more scripted and intentional, whereas this was free-flowing, kind of way more off the cuff. And you know you're having fun when a couple of hours flies by and you're thinking, what, that's it, the end already? Absolutely the case with those guys. Like I said, just had an absolute blast. We touched on some neat stuff, some of which I kind of want to expand on a little bit here. And look for that episode. My understanding is it might actually come out a day early at some point today. If that's not the case, or if it is, I will address it by the time this is all edited in the description. So look for that in the description below. Hopefully that is out today. You guys get a chance to see that. I think you'll agree. It was just lots of fun. Lots of fun. One of the things that we talked about, and it was an offshoot on one of the peripheral conversations, either VR Yaw, the Yaw device, or the VR Free, the glove device, about setup time. And one of the comments I made, because it really got me thinking about that. Look, it's one thing if you're a geek, right, who's already invested in this and passionate about it, and let's just say it, geekified about it. You probably most of the time don't care about the time invested to set things up. Most of us, we try to go about making it a bit more streamlined, but not everybody has that luxury. For example, I've finally got my Vive lighthouses ceiling mounted. That saves a hell of a lot of time, because if you're not putting them on the exact same spot, you are every single time essentially remapping your room scale space, right? Going through that whole configuration setup, which can take minutes. Then there's the question is, were you boneheaded like me, or did you remember to charge your Vive wands? Because if you didn't, that's going to put a dent into your plans right there, and it's probably going to take you 30 to 60 minutes to wait for those to have sufficient charge to be able to play. I still don't have my Rift sensors, for example, permanently mounted. That takes a little bit of time each time as well. And that's all the core kit, right? That's the main stable of equipment. It's no wonder those who are on the more casual extreme of this hobby, they liked VR enough to purchase it, but they're not the geeks that you or I are. Setup time is a significant concern for them. Maybe not if they do it once a week, they block off time, they've come to expect it. I'm talking about, the extreme of that as well, the casual, and I shouldn't say extreme because there's a lot of them. Setup time is not a moot thing. It's a factor. Not for us, but for a lot of people, it is. And that's one of the things VR is really going to have to address, especially as we move forward and the grunt work done by a lot of these third parties on technology that's going to be bundled in at some point, that convergence, right? As part of that core experience, it had better be streamlined. Look at my typical scenario. One of my favorite games, Elite Dangerous, the setup time for that. That's something I prefer to play on the Rift. I had just mentioned That's not something I've got permanently ceiling mounted or mounted anywhere, so I'm setting up my Rift sensors. Now, granted, a cockpit experience, it really only requires the one, so not a huge deal for that specific game. So I set up the sensor. Likewise, charge time for the Oculus Touch controllers, I can go a month usually before any kind of changing of the batteries is even remotely a concern. It's usually months and months, though. I think I mentioned I've only had to change them a couple of times overall. But what about the other stuff? Like, one of the things that I really enjoy about Elite Dangerous for the immersion is the fact that I can play it without mouse and keyboard, because I use the HOTAS and I pair that with voice attack. At the old place, I had everything set up with Velcro, so I could grab my HOTAS, which was within arm's reach, plunk it down on the Velcro strip, so I knew my hands would be in the exact same spot as my in-game avatars, with the throttle and the flight stick in the right position. So if you peek under your HMD, it looked identical. That did so much for the immersion for me. And voice attack was ready to go. Well, obviously moving here, my first time was a gong show. It took hours to get back to having things configured. And I didn't learn from that, which, again, the boneheaded part of me, I didn't put that Velcro back down, but I will at some point. And I'll have them within arm's reach. Right now, they're in the other room. But again, that's all part of what I would consider the core for Elite Dangerous. That's the core experience. As we're seeing things get bundled in, that setup time had better be streamlined or it's just going to get worse. Let's take the TPcast example. So they had a little bit of a kind of an informal partnership with HTC, but for the most part, they rolled up their sleeves and they were prepared to tackle wireless for the Vive and then the Rift, warts and all. They did all the dirty work. Experienced the latency issues, some graphical corruptions to deliver us that holy grail of tether-free VR. And I'm not suggesting as a thank you, HTC then partners with Intel. Whatever the reasons, that's not the point of this discussion. We can talk about that perhaps another time. But they did partner with Intel, and based on a lot of the R&D that TPcast had to suffer through, came out with their version of a 60 gigahertz wireless device. Might not be the best looking thing, but it addresses a lot of the core issues that TPcast had to suffer through. We're going to see that all over the place, and I hope these brave companies, courageous companies, continue to do that important research and development, because the best of that, the cream of that crop, is going to become part of the core experience, like it was with wireless, with TPcast. It's still not bundled in necessarily, but it's going to become an official accessory for them, and I expect at maybe the next iteration beyond that, it will be bundled in, and it will be part of Rift, and it will be part of PlayStation VR and other VR players, the mixed reality devices as well. And other stuff, if there's a compelling enough reason, if it makes enough of an impact, if it's a game changer, the companies are going to accommodate haptic devices, new controls that bring something unique to the table. It's going to happen. The best of those. And unfortunately, that again means that they suffer the financial burden, do a lot of that grunt work, and then fall to the wayside. Hopefully they get acquired and they get kind of bundled in that way. You kind of hope, because yeah, it is a little sad, I got to admit, that so many of them, the attrition rate, I've said this so many times before, is going to be high. Look at it I talked about TPcast. Did I even mention the other solutions? No. And why? Because nobody else is. Because a lot of their work is happening without any marketing or any exposure, and I'm sad to say, any real market penetration. They're probably not going to be part of the discussion at all come summertime, which is sad. But hopefully some of their hard work lives on, and you got to think with them, if it's not the 60 gigahertz stuff, maybe some of their compression IP gets purchased, right, by some of these companies. Then we've got the haptics. What about a Tesla suit? Is some future iteration of VR going to include a haptic suit? If it does, it had freaking better be streamlined, because take everything I said about the setup time for something like Elite Dangerous and then add another 15, 20, 25 minutes to that, trying to get yourself into what amounts basically to a diving wetsuit, right? If you are not of the svelte variety, it's probably going to be a significant challenge and definitely take you a bit more time. Then we're talking other type of devices that there might be. Maybe it's haptic floor tiles. Where I'm going with this is just it's all added time. And for the casual gamer, that's a death sentence. That's a death knell right there. They're not going to proceed. You and I will, but we always were going to. The casual mainstream gamer who we really need to sell this to for VR ultimately to be as successful as we need it to be. And it can't be that type of an experience for them. It has to be optimized. It has to be streamlined. That's how I feel about it. Unless you've got a convincing argument otherwise, I think that's just common sense. I think it makes sense that setup time has to be minimized and it has to be a factor into every iteration after these initial ones. So we'll see if they agree. You would think they'd have to, because like I said, it does seem to be common sense. If something takes you 45 minutes to an hour to set up, that's not going to appeal to the average gamer. It just won't, unless it's the most compelling reason. And one game alone or a handful of experiences, that's not going to sell it either. We talked also, just to kind of switch paces here a little bit, some games came up. One of those, Sprint Vector, which I was happy to hear. I wasn't the only one who wasn't able to actually get into the gameplay. A couple of others had the similar issue. I think Gary and Anthony, although one of them eventually got in, I didn't. All the marketing that had been done for that game, and I know I dump on marketing quite a little bit, but here's a perfect example. And I know you got to be careful with that, with trademarks and patents, especially the big N company. You know of who I speak. You got to be careful or there's lawsuits. But Steve, I believe, mentioned it, and he likened the gameplay a lot to Mario Kart. Now, for me, Mario Kart, guys, hands down, one of the best family games. My wife, daughter, myself, countless dozens of hours playing that game. You want to talk the reverse of little to no setup time? That's the game. If you've had the GameCube controllers, which is where we first played it on, it was literally plug in that extra GameCube controller, throw the disc in, hit start, enter the multiplayer, and away you go. Yeah, it usually played out. Me and my daughter would jockey for first place, and my wife was always dead last. But it wasn't about that. It was just about the fun, the laughs that we had along the way. Thankfully, none of us of that kind of, Monopoly attitude where you don't win enough or something bad happens and you throw the damn table all around, right? And pieces go flying. 3 of us pretty chill about that. So we didn't kind of take it to that extreme. But yeah, that's all it took for Steve to mention that, for me to look at Sprint Vector in a whole different way and say, wow, okay, I need to give this due diligence. Now, unfortunately, the beta time has lapsed, but the next opportunity I get, absolutely, I'm going to spend some time on that, and there will be a quick look on that. So it just goes to show you, just having that conversation with like-minded people, and it's why I think forums and kind of being evangelists for VR is so important. Sure, we can't sell the experience. Short of trying it, we've pretty much all agreed it's hard to convey, but it's little things like that. You know, if a game truly, it has to fit. If it doesn't, they're not going to trust your opinion in the future. But if it really does have elements of a Mario Kart in there, or a Zelda, or insert whatever popular game they can relate to, it's another good way to sell VR to those around you. So yeah, that came out of that and just got me thinking. So after that, I was thinking for hours about things. Like one of what I would love to see, I've always enjoyed the Total War series. And when I think about what games would make fantastic virtual reality candidates, Total War series, absolutely one of them. The way it can change camera perspective from third person, and then you can kind of mimic that first person view. So you're seeing the battle as one of the legionnaires, or as the general, or, up on a horse on a hill somewhere, not necessarily leading the charge, or with a modern day thing like a drone hovering over the battlefield artificially, which they would never have access to back then. But thanks to technology, we can. There's all kinds of ways to enjoy the view on that game and still be just as invested in the strategy. I would love to see something ancient Rome, Greece, of that kind of caliber, right? That kind of sophistication, I think would just be absolutely awe-inspiring in the same way that Google Earth VR is for me, with something as banal, as common as just maps, street views of a location, I get super excited about. Yes, Total War series in VR, I think would be absolutely brilliant. The other thing I've been asked a lot the last week especially has been Pimax. Concerns from a lot of people. Epics, I feel really bad based on what you said. I'm one of those people who invested in Pimax. Should I be concerned? And I've had the same thing to say to all of them. And that is simply, I wouldn't be too concerned. They were in a position, look, I'm going to take them at face value. They were in a position where they had just received that additional funding, the $15 million. And I do think they were of the mindset that they were going to add or fix whatever they needed to make it the best experience at launch. I do believe that. I really do. Along comes CES 2018, and even though it was kind of always there on the calendar, you got to see where it comes up in their cycle. It comes in just enough time after that $15 million in additional funding, where they've already probably started tweaking with things, experimenting. And I think, to use a poor analogy, they were kind of caught with their pants down. They had to have a presence. Not having a presence at CES would probably make people way more suspicious and concerned. If you want to talk concerned, not showing up would have been a bigger concern. Then showing up and falling back on a safe experience with the Blue, because it was, right? It wasn't tracking intensive. It didn't highlight the deficiencies that were clearly there when they showed up. So no, based on all of that, I wouldn't be too concerned. Is it something I would have invested in? No, but then you guys know I'm a lot more risk adverse with stuff, especially when it comes to Kickstarters. And I've said all along, this isn't something new, that the more technical something is on Kickstarter, the more complex, the more likely it is to fail. That's kind of been the MO of Kickstarters. That's the history. That's how things usually trend. But that's not to say that's the case here. I simply didn't invest because of my aversion to risk. That's just me, my nature, right? I know I've got all those other units, but I only purchased those other units after I had kind of a level of self-assuredness that, you know what, they're going to be okay. They may not be the market leaders, but they're part of this whole exciting revolution of VR, and I'm going to support those units. Pimax, a bit of an interloper. I don't put it in that same category, but I'm equally excited, guys. And when they launch, and they will, that's where I kind of want to, put your fears to rest. Then I will evaluate, and I'm going to see how it compares at that point, and then make the decision if I ultimately buy that. Because just being honest, I'm kind of leaning towards the Vive Pro at this point. For me, that's kind of the more compelling device, or one of the leaders maybe with mobile before Pimax, but Pimax comfortably the third choice after that. It's still something that's on my radar, but I'm going to wait for that. But for you guys who did invest, yeah, I would not worry now. Look, had they not had that $15 million in funding and then not showed up at CES 2018, a whole different situation. The way they've been going about it, I think is the right way. They've kept open dialogue. They were quick to address the criticisms levied against the device at CES, if you'll recall. And from a technical point of view, the stuff that had red flags for me was the more minor thing. I do agree that because they're basing their tracking on a bundled solution that we know works, yeah, I'm not too concerned there. I'm more concerned about stuff like the warping on the field of view than I am about the tracking. So don't worry, guys. It will launch and it will have that stuff addressed. If it has enough beyond that to be a market leader, well, that is all going to be wait and see, but still shouldn't dissuade you from having made that investment. My 2 cents, guys. Next up, the Oculus update. Some concerns on this too from people, but the thing that I quickly point to is, look, they're going about this the right way. Think what you want about them as a company, it's beta. And the true definition of beta is there's going to be issues. It's not a final version ready for mastering or go gold or whatever the terminology is, right? Like we would say at Electronic Arts, we had alphas and we had betas. And the true definition of a beta was, yeah, it's not ready for prime time. We needed to find out what those issues were, especially the showstoppers. It looked a hell of a lot better than alpha. Alpha is really, we're talking drawing board material. Beta was almost ready for prime time, but there's issues. And that's all we're seeing with the Oculus 2.0. They made some significant core changes. Of course, there's going to be issues there. And that's the whole point of the beta, is to flush those out and fix them. If this was their actual launch and they had some of these issues and concerns, I'd be worried. But much like with the Pimax, no, they're going about it the right way. They're doing things as a beta. They're making sure it's tested by the people who use it, you guys, me, us, and they're going to address it before the final launch. So I think the rendering, the stability, the performance issues, those will for the most part be resolved. There's going to be some niggling issues still, absolutely, but they'll figure those out too. So 2018, with all that I've kind of talked about, what are my choices going to be for me, Epics, going into this year? Well, I've said it before, the financial situation that I find myself in is night and day from what it was in Vancouver, where, let's be real, I spent with pretty much reckless abandon, and if I wanted it, I purchased it. Learning to be more frugal here and prioritize my purchases and categorize things as needs versus wants, etc. And I think you've seen my hardware situation really hasn't changed much. What were the most significant purchases? A lav microphone and yeah, that's about it really, other than some games. So I'm going to try to keep that same mindset throughout the year, even when I get a full-time job again. But priorities would be, first up, wireless. And that's going to probably at this point be the official HTC Intel partnered wireless along with a Vive Pro device. That's kind of where I see it going. We haven't heard a lot about Oculus yet. Expect that to change as we move closer to E3 and, of course, the Connect event that they host in late summer, early fall. We're going to get a better idea leading up to that, what they have planned hardware-wise. So I know it sounds very HTC-centric, but that's the reason. They've told us what they have in store for us. Oculus really hasn't yet. And then on the PlayStation side of things, my priority is still to find a second Move controller, having lost one in the Move, which is a pain in the arse because I can only see it sold in pairs, but the guys on VR Roundtable, quick to give me some suggestions on how to go about like looking for people who are selling PlayStation 3 systems very often. They may have a pair that they're willing to sell individually at a decent price. So I'm going to try that. And we also don't really know with PlayStation, other than, well, the change they've already announced, but what else they have in store for us. So at this point, that's my priority. Wireless, probably the HTC one, followed by the Vive Pro as a hardware device. And third after that would probably be the lighthouses, the improved ones beyond that. How about you guys? Let me know what you have planned for this year. Forget games. That's an obvious. Whenever there's something appealing, we're going to try to get it. But what about hardware-wise? Part of an add-on to your core bundle, whether you're Rift, Vive, PlayStation VR, mixed reality. What are your priority purchases for 2018? Love to hear those. And then I just want to end things with kind of the sum of all of this stuff that we talked about today. And I think it boils down to another thing I get asked a lot is how to introduce VR to people for the first time. And I think based on everything I've said, try to accommodate that. Make sure you've got the setup time prepped for them. If it's going to take 30 minutes, don't make them sit through that 30 minutes. Even if you think you're building up the anticipation and excitement, not a good idea. Have that all ready to go beforehand. That's the biggest tip I can give there. And know what that person likes. If this is Grandpa Harrison Ford, for example, we know Grandpa Ford loves to fly, right? So for him, and he's a military buff, Grandpa Ford, so put him in DCS would be what I would do for somebody like that. Grandma Tilly, she loves travel. Google Earth VR would be something you would do there. And little ginger cousin Henry, he likes stuff of a little bit more of a heavy kind of violent interactive sort. You might want to do something like Onward or one of the other types of games like that, Raw Data, that sort of thing. Just find out what they like and what the logical extension to that would be in virtual reality. That's what I've done. Well, guys, that's it for this episode. Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic weekend. And like I said, I will put it in the description, a link, if that VR Roundtable episode is ready. You guys can have a watch and let me know what you think of it. Let me know what you think of the show in the comments below. Have a fantastic weekend, guys. We will catch you again tomorrow for another VR podcast. Cheers, guys.